Are we raising kids who are connected to their devices but disconnected from their own bodies? If too much screen time is reshaping how kids sense the world, the next step isn't just limiting access. It's creating stronger habits around when and how screens are used. Hello, friends, and welcome back to our Conversation Book Club. We are going through today Chapter 4 of Disconnected, and it is titled The Multitasking Brain of Kids. Doesn't that title to say it all? So it's about what actually is happening to kids' brains when they live in a world of constant distraction. Now, Kersting makes a clear case that multitasking with technology doesn't just affect how kids behave, but it also reshapes how they think, how they learn, and even how they feel. So let's take a closer look. So he says on page 77, kids are posting, texting, listening to music, watching YouTube, and doing homework simultaneously. And for some strange reason, we ignore this. All right, now we've all seen this. Kids doing 5 things at once, bouncing between tabs, switching songs, scrolling TikTok during homework. And we might even laugh and say, they're just multitasking. But the brain can't multitask. Not really. It switches rapidly between tasks, and that switching drains mental energy. And it leaves kids foggy, agitated, and less able to concentrate deeply. So instead of getting good at everything, they get worse at all of it. And yet, this has become the normal. So when kids act impatient, scattered, or forgetful, maybe it's not a character flaw, maybe it's the wiring we're allowing. And if we think it's just a temporary distraction or harmless habit, the research tells us a different story. It's not just that attention spans are shrinking, it's the actual structure of the brain that's being reshaped. So he talks on page 77 and 78. 22 peer-reviewed studies found that heavy media multitaskers performed worse on attention and memory tests, and in some cases, they had developed structural changes in the brain. Let that sink in. Structural changes. So this isn't just behavioral, it's biological. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on experience, is being shaped by nonstop interruptions and constant switching. When the brain is trained to expect interruptions, it begins to crave them. Focus feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels unnatural. And this brings to mind a story that I think you as a parent can share with your child, one that gently explores what happens when we scatter our energy too thin. And it's called The Beekeeper's Map. So there's a boy named Theo who wanted to be a great beekeeper. He was eager, passionate, and full of ideas. But instead of learning from one hive, he built 5. And he ran from one to another, checking combs here, adjusting frames there, trying to do it all. But each hive struggled. Honey spoiled, bees left. An older beekeeper was watching this, and finally he said, if you want to help the bees, take care of one hive until it's strong. If you spread yourself too thin, the bees won't stay in any of them. So that season, Theo focused on just one hive. He listened, he observed, and that hive flourished. So the lesson here is focus creates growth. Distraction diminishes everything. So you can ask your child a question or two after you finish reading it. So one of them could be, why did Theo struggle when he tried to manage too many hives? Or you could ask them, what changed when he gave his full attention to one? So Theo's story shows us what happens when we stretch our attention thin. The things we care about start to suffer. And it's not just our tasks that feel the impact. When multitasking becomes the norm, it reaches deeper in how we relate, how we remember, and even how we show up for others. So, staying on the theme of multitasking, he goes on to say on page 85, Multitasking affects learning, schoolwork, and memory. Too much media use can also undermine empathy and reduce face-to-face conversation. Okay, that one really made me think, because memory and learning, okay, that's one thing, but empathy, think about what that means. When we're constantly toggling between apps, we don't just lose focus, we lose depth. Depth in thought, depth in relationships. We don't notice faces. We don't hear emotion. We don't feel as much. And we're seeing it in kids. They're struggling to hold eye contact, to stay in a conversation, to pick up on social cues. So this reminded me of a story of what happens when our care becomes shallow. It's called The Sparrow's Nest. In a meadow near the woods, a young sparrow decided to build her very first nest. She was excited, full of energy, and eager to impress the other birds. So instead of focusing on just one task at a time, she tried to do everything at once. She gathered twigs while still scouting leaves. She flew halfway across the meadow for grass and then darted back to grab some moss, all while watching what the other birds were doing. She was fast. She was also scattered. Her nest ended up flimsy and full of gaps. When the first storm came, it collapsed completely. An older bird helped her rebuild, slowly, carefully, together. And this time, the sparrow focused. The nest held strong. And the lesson is, when we try to do too many things at once, we don't give anything the care it really needs and deserves, including the people around us. So you can ask your child a question or two after you read the story. Why didn't the sparrow's first nest hold up? Or have you ever rushed through something and felt like it didn't turn out the way you hoped? But what happens when we don't just scatter our focus, we overuse it to the point where it is affecting our bodies too? So that's where the next text comes in. It was on page 86. MRIs of 4,500 kids, so 4,500 kids, showed premature thinning of the cortex in those using screens over 7 hours a day. Now, this is kind of disturbing. The cortex processes input from the five senses. It's how we sense the world, how we understand touch, sound, sight, smell, taste. So when the part of the brain starts to thin early, it raises some real questions. How will these kids engage in the real world? Will they still feel it? Are we raising kids who are connected to their devices but disconnected from their own bodies? If too much screen time is reshaping how kids sense the world, the next step isn't just limiting access. It's creating stronger habits around when and how screens are used. Kersting shifts from describing the problem to offering a practical way to protect focus, learning, and well-being. So he said on page 85, and this is really powerful, never allow your children to have a smartphone anywhere near them while doing homework. Now, Kersting doesn't mince words here, and for good reason. The part of the chapter shifts from describing the problem to offering straightforward, actionable advice. And it's not just about whether kids can use technology, it's about when and how they use it. So we're not saying let's ban devices altogether, but to create boundaries that protect their ability to concentrate, reflect, and engage deeply. Phones and alerts during homework don't just steal attention in the moment, they train the brain to expect constant interruption. That's why Kersting strongly recommends simple shifts. Number 1, keep smartphones out of reach during homework. 2, turn off all notifications on laptops. 3, avoid playing music, even if kids say it helps them to concentrate. And number 4, don't allow multi-screening, such as TV plus a phone, for example. And these aren't rigid rules, but they're safeguards, ways to protect what's already under siege: focus, memory, and learning itself. So let me just tell one more story to wrap this up. It's called The Puzzle Table. Tammy loved puzzles. She had a 1,000-piece space-themed puzzle spread across the kitchen table, and every day after school, she'd sit down to work on it. but her tablet was always nearby and it kept lighting up. New videos, new messages, new games. She'd start the puzzle, then stop, start again, then stop. And after 3 days, the puzzle looked like it was barely touched. Frustrated, she told her dad, I can't seem to get anywhere with this. And her dad sat down and said, well, what if you move the tablet somewhere else, just for a while you're working? Reluctantly, she agreed. And the next day, she worked for 45 minutes straight. The next, it was an hour. And by the end of the week, the puzzle was finished, and she felt proud. She hadn't needed more time. What she needed was fewer distractions. And the lesson here is sometimes it's not about trying harder. It's about removing what gets in the way of focus. So here are some questions that you can ask your child. Why did Tammy have trouble finishing her puzzle? What changed when she moved the tablet away? Or you could ask them, can you think of something you'd enjoy more if you weren't distracted while doing it? Tammy just needed a little shift in her environment to protect her focus. And that's the heart of it. When we create space for presence, our kids can show up with more clarity, connection, and calm. And this brings us to the big picture as we wrap things up. Tech is not the enemy, but when left unchecked, it rewires our kids' attention, their empathy, their memory. And the good news is that it's not permanent. Neuroplasticity goes both ways. The same way the brain can be wired for distraction, it can be retrained for presence. We don't need to panic, but we should pause because the future is being built not just with apps and screens, but inside the minds of our children. And let's help them build a brain that's ready to focus, to feel, and to connect. Thanks for listening. Till the next time, keep having those conversations.